I need you to hate so I can use you for your energy.
This is Real Sales Talk. Real sales advice from real sales practitioners. Giving you tips on how to dominate your sales quota are your co-hosts, Sean Mitchell and Phill Keen.
We don't have a process for referrals at most companies. I go into a company, I say, what's your referral process? They have no, well, what do you mean?
I think that goes back to the premise that why do salespeople suck at prospecting? I mean, number one reason why they suck at prospecting is they don't actually do it.
If you are successful and nobody knows, in 2016, 20, 2025, you're not successful.
You ever want to find out what's going on in the company? Get in the car and spend a day with the top 3 salespeople. You'll find out in 5 minutes.
Because you can't be a trusted advisor without two things, trust and advice. I mean, you need both of them.
What is going on, Real Sales Talk family? It is season 5, episode 2. A very special guest today that's going to be joining Sean and I. We have Marylou Tyler. So anybody that's ever heard the book Predictable Revenue, hopefully you're well aware of her name. And very, very, very excited. We've had some pretty passionate conversations around prospecting before, so I know it'll be a strong one.
Indeed.
And we're also joined by Casey the dog. So for anybody that's on the YouTube channel, check it out. If you're on podcast, he's sleeping behind her, and he looks like a nice old dog. So
this is his toy.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Cool.
He's a good boy.
So yeah, well, we're excited to have you on. And
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah.
Excited to talk about prospecting.
Absolutely. So
yeah.
Let's just get into it. I'm excited about the topic. So we're going to talk through how to identify your ideal prospects, land critical meetings, and then cold call emails and cold call calling. And it's not dead. So
never dead.
Yeah, lots of good topics. So let's get started right on the heart of the whole thing with predictable prospecting. Maybe tell us a little bit about the premise of predictable prospecting, but then tell me that the first step, the first bullet of how do you identify ideal prospects?
Well, it's funny. I get asked a lot about predictable prospecting and the why behind it. And long story short, Predictable Revenue was released in 2011. So it's 5 going on 6 years old. I know some people are just getting Predictable Revenue, and it's a great book to get started, but there were a lot of holes in it that we've shored up after 5 years of being in the field, resulting in predictable prospecting. My co-author, Jeremy Donovan, is actually a client of mine, and it was because of him that this book came to be, because as I started teaching the framework to his organization and to his staff, he realized that there's this version of Predictable Revenue, and then there's the book. So he was like, why did this happen? So it started off with a lot of the things I saw in the field, that people weren't really narrowing that niche into who their ideal customers are and their ideal accounts, overlaying that with the fact that we're kind of going away from this mass emailing process of lead follow-up more to account-based nurturing and conversations one-on-one. So this framework really addresses all of those issues of really trying to have that one-on-one conversation, but leveraging technology to do that.
See, it's great. I think you addressed a little bit too what has really evolved in the last 5 years, and you mentioned account-based, but it's this batch and blast world just doesn't work the same way it used to, because people are just getting smarter and buyers are getting smarter, which we guys can, episode 1, we talk about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear your kind of process there of why do you think the buyers evolved so much in 5 years, and why has the game changed so much?
Well, I think a lot of it, if you look back in the days of direct mail, before the internet even existed, we kind of did a spray and pray thing back then. We just didn't have technology. So what we learned from that is it's still a one-to-one conversation. And so we need to leverage technology where we can to bubble those conversations up, to get those people and the sentiment behind the conversation to the point where they're ready to have a conversation with us. But spraying and praying out there and just one generic message, it's just infuriating to our buyers. They don't like it. They really want, with all the tools that are out there now and the internet that you can research, they want to feel that you've taken the time to know a little bit more about them and also to know what their hopes and dreams are going forward. So that's changed a lot because there's an expectation, right or wrong, on the part of the buyer that you should know more about me before you pick up that phone, before you send me that email, and don't treat me like cattle. Do not lump me in with the masses. I am unique, and I want you to do your homework to know that.
Yeah,
That's the difference now.
It's almost like sales has gotten back to that the old marketing quote of if you market to everybody, you market to nobody. And I think sales is now
Exactly.
get to that same place.
It is. And I've been around a long time. I'm going on 30 years now of doing this. So I was in the direct response, direct mail craziness, which is what we're seeing with email. I mean, it's just history is repeating itself. It's a different vehicle, but it's the same psychology that we're not being respectful of our buyers. So predictable prospecting really hones in on thinking through who are these people, what companies do I best fit into? And then this whole SWOT analysis, chapter 1 of the book, which floors everybody, that is really looking at the why. Why change? Why now? And why me? And you have to go through that exercise so that it frames your sales conversation in such a way to get your foot in the door, which is where I specialize, and then getting it all the way to close.
So let's take that idea and run with it. How do you identify your prospects, your ideal prospects, so that you're spending your time on the right people and in the right places?
The first thing that I like to do with prospect personas is to get over yourself that marketing has already generated those for you. Because a lot of times the pushback I get from clients is that, hey, marketing's already built our personas. We're done. We're good. You're not. Think about the call to action for marketing. They're trying to get to that marketing qualified lead. There's no conversation that's taken place yet necessarily, other than maybe filling out a form on the website. But our call to action is to actually get a first meeting, to have a conversation. That's a very different result that we're looking for with these persona definitions. So we have to take it further. We have to identify not only our target, bullseye, but we also need to look one ring out, which are the people that directly influence our guy, and then one more ring out from that of the people who indirectly influence our guy. That's not existing in a marketing persona, but we need that because we're still navigating in and around the bullseye to try to get our foot in the door. That's a big difference that people are just now starting to understand why I keep pushing to build these prospect personas. The other thing we do is we're looking at not only the challenge they have, but where they want to go and that path to get there. We have to really plan that out. What's their first success look like? What does the middle of the journey success look like? And what does the ultimate goal result look like? It's not just the end game, it's the path to get there, because that's going to help us build more rapport and trust with our prospects as we march them down the pipeline towards close.
I think there's something really critical. So I want to unpack the three rings a little bit further. So maybe explain the three rings in a little more detail. If I'm a prospector, I'm a BDR, an SDR, ADR, whatever nomenclature you use inside your company,
right?
Or even an AE prospecting on my own. How do I work those three rings appropriately? How do I get one person that can potentially influence a decision maker to do enough to make the introduction for me or to refer me into how do I get that?
Right. The best way to do it is when you're building that ring, the bullseye, I call it, you're actually looking at the points of conversation that you think are relevant for that person. It may be that they're part of an initiative, that they want to get this done. They may be an end user of the initiative. So you have to really define what's going to get them to sort of lean into their computer or lean into the phone to say, oh my gosh, you're speaking to me. You know exactly what I'm going through. And then you suggest, well, especially if they're an indirect influencer, the next step then is to contact Joe and get a meeting with Joe and Bob or whoever and come together to discuss this, because we may have something here that's a good fit for you, but we really need to get together as a team and figure that out. So you're really using a lot of psychology, a lot of properties of influence. I would recommend everybody read Cialdini's book, the old and the new one, because I can get you to the door with all the process and stuff that we teach for predictable prospecting. But that first conversation, those first 15 seconds is all you. And it's all really understanding the behavior of each of those people around those rings. So you spend time, you role play conversations with your teammates. Get as much done as you can before you actually pick up the phone so that you're comfortable. It's ingrained in your body. You can sit there straight up. You're their peer, talking peer to peer, to get these conversations to a point where you can get the first meeting or get the demo or get the opportunity that you're looking for.
How do you start identifying some of those rings? Is that something when you're talking with a client, does that discovery of who those influencers are in those rings happen by nature of conversation with them, or do you have some tools and some software that help aggregate some of that information automatically?
Great question. And it really depends. Let's pretend we have someone who's got clients already. And because a lot of my clients don't have clients yet. But someone who has clients, what I would do is I would pick up the old telephone and interview them to understand more about their journey to becoming a client of ours. Who was involved initially in the conversations? Why were they involved? How did they impact your decision to take the next step with us? Yada, yada, yada. Work that all the way down. And it's starting to draw that map for you. The same thing if you don't have clients, you go out to the world of prospects, contact them. Don't be afraid. That's what we do. We contact people we don't know on a regular basis. So this is no different doing research. And you ask them similar questions. You also do whatever the challenge is, spacebar forum on the internet, and you start getting an understanding of the prospects themselves speaking in their language of what their challenges are, how they overcame them. That kind of research is never existed when I was, back in sales, but just doing that and getting a gist of the discussions that are going on is going to give you a pretty good idea of the roles. And then you look in LinkedIn or these other tools that have the roles, and there's a little sidebar that said, like people in their company, and you start developing this sort of mental map of the rings. Now, you're not going to be perfect. I love this phrase from Aaron Ross that he used a long time ago saying, don't worry, be crappy. Just get the rings done. And you're going to iterate and improve on that as you start calling in and around that bullseye.
All right. So here's my question, because it's actually timely. So you have inside of your talk tracks and said the stuff you've written. So you have a client that previously had 500 identified like prospect lists or viable prospects. Yeah. And you found out it's actually 50,000. So I actually just did this, and we're identifying target accounts that are ideal customer target accounts that we are going to hand off to our sales team. 100 out of a list that was a addressable market of like whatever 70 or 80,000. Like, what was the thing that you saw that wasn't 500? It was 50,000.
What happened was, and this was hilarious because this was for a larger client. So they had a big house list of people that had opted in, or somehow they got these names in the list. So we identified this persona, called her Betty, because she was indicative of the liaison between marketing. I think it was an IT was her role. So we looked in their house list for the number of Bettys, because we determined that if we get Betty involved early on, we're going to reduce that lag, get that meeting, and it's going to close a heck of a lot faster if we involve her right here in the pipeline. So we looked in their database, they had the 500, but then we went to LinkedIn, just a simple LinkedIn, and did a search and count on the number of Bettys via the role. And that's where we saw how many there were. And it was a big eye opener, like, okay, we're short quite a bit of names. So we then looked for list sources to complete the picture so that we can put them in the engine and start working up that, what I call waking up the chill, which is getting them to figuring out what level of awareness they were in for our product or service.
So maybe go back then. So what was the process to find Betty? Like, how do you find a prospect? How do you identify that Betty's the person you want to speak to?
There are a number of different variables and questions, and they're all outlined in chapter 3 of the book. And I have probably a 16 step question framework that I could pass along to you guys if you'd like. But it basically gives you the internal and external research places that you go to find Betty, to end up with someone whose name is Betty with this particular type of role. So that, it's compiling, external and internal factors, and then overlaying that, if you have clients, looking at the buyer's journey of how they actually bought from you. It's looking at any surveys that you've done. If you're a bigger company, a lot of times they do loyalty surveys. So it's taking all these disparate pieces of information and then combining it into a map, what starts to look like a map. And the pieces of information aren't difficult to find. It's just, you got to think outside the box that there are external factors and internal factors that will help build this ideal prospect persona. The interview process is just one of those levers that I talked about. There are many others, and they're all listed in the book, every single one. And I have an actual prospect persona form that you can fill out as you go that'll help identify who these people are. And then it also talks about that indirect and direct influencers as well, because we use the bullseye later on in our contact sequence and how we actually contact the company.
So those lists that you just mentioned, or outlines, they can get that through the book, correct?
Yes, it's right in the book. And
Perfect.
There's a little cheat sheet in the back of the book where we actually filled one out because I know my audience, that they're like, okay, I believe you, Marylou, but give me the short version. So in the back of the book is a completely filled out prospect persona for you. And
That's
then
awesome.
I actually put the forms out for the audience from the book so that they can download the Google Doc and away they go.
Perfect. Let's transition to landing crucial meetings. Unpack that a little bit more. So you've identified your ideal prospects. You're starting to call on them. How does someone land those crucial meetings?
The main thing is to leverage technology where it makes sense. So if you've identified the right person, then by virtue of the fact that you know who the right person is, don't spam them with emails. Put them into the queue that says, I know they're the right person, so I'm going to do more what we call hyper personalization of the email, which means we have the sales conversation already embedded in the email, but we add a level of personalization to it so that the recipient hears us and knows that we are speaking specifically to them because we're mentioning something specific about them.
Give an example of that highly personalization, because does that mean, because I can hear someone thinking, does that mean that I have to personalize every single individual email that I send out, or is it more generalized to kind of fit that ideal customer persona?
The answer to that question is based on whether the sequence is running in what I call while you're sleeping mode, which means the data is being grabbed from a database and populated, versus it's in your list of 20 people you're going to call today. Take the 3 to 5 minutes to add in the personalization. So it really depends on, am I working my core accounts that I already know the right guy, and I want them to know that I'm working on them specifically? Or is it the other 40 or 50 accounts where I kind of know they're the right guy, or I'm getting closer, but I'm going to let the technology and the data have that conversation for me so I can tell where they are in that level of awareness about my product or service?
So maybe so that's definitely email, and that makes a lot of sense. But predictable revenue, a big part of it was phone, and it was a large part of how things work. So maybe even talk on the phone side too. How do I do enough research but still get conversations started via phone? Does that change as well?
The phone, there's no such thing as cold calling per se anymore. We're warming up the chill by having information ahead of time about our prospect. So a typical day in the life of an SDR who's using the phone would be to take 3 to 5 minutes at the end of his business day when the phone block time is not ideal, meaning no one's going to pick up anyway, go through their accounts, quickly look in LinkedIn or whatever your favorite research tool is, find that little tidbit if you can, and then have it ready to go. And I actually teach my folks, if you're calling on 20 accounts, then you're going to create a call, very simple call planning form. And in there, you're going to put the relevant topic that you're going to talk about. And then you're also going to say, if I connect with them, this is what I'm going to say. If I don't connect with them, this is what I'm going to do. And it's a very easy process. It shouldn't take more than 20 minutes to prepare your call list for the very next day. You go home, you go to sleep, it's all incubating in your head. You come back in, you have your view now of what you're supposed to call on. It's readily available to help you start that conversation, to know where you left off in some cases, if you're doing a second conversation, and you just work down that list. You single task. That's the most important thing that I don't think a lot of people get still, is that you don't do a voicemail and then switch to email and then come back to do a phone call. You are just calling, and you're calling with a little bit of prep work, but you also know your persona, so you can get the gist of what they're going to be concerned about. And you have your 2 to 3 relevant questions ready to go because you've practiced them, that you're going to be asking them, mostly to get them off kilter. You want to ask them something that gets them thinking, wow, no one's ever asked me that just like that way before. That's where you want to get. You got to practice that, but you only need a few of those and you can go down the list very quickly. Really, you're trying to do 2 things. One is you are their peer. That's another thing I see people do incorrectly. They don't have the mindset that I am at the same level as the person I'm calling. I'm a business executive talking to a business executive. I'm a CMO talking to a CMO. When you're on the phone like that, you need that demeanor, because that comes across. As I said in one webinar I did, 75% of your success is based on the tone of your voice. It's not what you say.
Yeah, I think it's good. I love that you're systematic around, or you have to have a process. You have to do these things. And one of the things I've always seen from SDRs specifically is they don't live in that world of I'm a CMO, I'm your peer, you and I can have that conversation. And they also don't give themselves credit for the things they do. So they're doing this research and they kind of start the conversation, and then they immediately go back to the initial call script that you gave them. So I thought it was interesting. You said you have the 2 or 3 questions, but you didn't say you got a plan of attack and this is exactly what you're going to say every single time. So
No.
Things that you should be doing. What are good habits that you should be doing as an SDR or an AE, even as prospecting?
Well, I did an actual LinkedIn post on the 7 healthy habits. It's too long to go into right now for phone calling, but the tone is important. Smiling when you're on the phone, just smiling changes the tonality of your voice. Have those 2 to 3 questions planned up front that you are going to say and practice them. Role playing is the best thing you could do. If you could do one thing today from this call, go and role play, look at yourself in the mirror and practice. Just practice talking to the CMO or whoever your target people are. If you practice that, you start internalizing it, your confidence just immediately goes up. And that's the name of the game when it comes to the phone. I can tell you from personal experience, there is this big thing about, well, buyers are smart now. They are researching us. They're doing searches. You know what? A CMO at Chase Bank, tell me, I am so glad you called, Marylou, because I wouldn't have had time to figure out what path we could go down. So you calling me and telling me the types of things we should think about, this call I've ever had. And that's how we as SDRs and business developers and AEs who are doing prospecting, that is the mindset we need to wake up with every morning, that we are here to help people enjoy life better with less stress.
Yeah.
Opening up that conversation for them. That's what we do. We have to look at it that way.
Yeah.
I've got a question I want to insert there before we kind of get to another topic. For the younger person, typically, account executives are a little bit more tenured, but for the business development rep or the new sales rep who needs to convey confidence and peer-to-peer perspective, how do they do that? Because if you're new, there's a little bit of uncertainty about what you're doing. Does rehearsing solve that completely? What is some advice that you would give to a new salesperson, BDR, someone who's maybe not as experienced, who may need to call on a VP or senior executive and have that confidence that they're speaking peer to peer?
Well, I can tell you from experience, I ran a 250 seat call center, and we used to set appointments. That's all we did. We did it at risk. So it wasn't a time-based thing. We just set appointments, and I got kids from all over the place to come and get on the phone. And all we did was call. We didn't have email, all these other things. The number one training tip that I can give you is to practice, and also to grab whoever the C-suite is, the director of sales, grab him, role play with him, grab whoever in your company is the guy that you're going after, grab them and practice. They've been getting the same phone calls, so they know all the tricks to get you off the phone. What better way to practice in an environment where they love you because you're an employee with them? Seek out the colleagues that you're calling on within your company and role play with them. Just 10 minutes a day is going to make a world of difference in your success. I promise you.
I definitely, I think it hits to your point, which we said we're going to talk through. Like, the cold call is not dead. And if you are relevant and you have relevance in your conversation, it doesn't matter what medium you use.
Right.
And you make them think it's going to elicit a response. So as we talked about doing research and save some time, and you have a system behind it. But if I'm an SDR, where would you start? Where would be the first thing I go do to go figure out about my prospect? Is it just go to LinkedIn and go look at their profile, or where?
I think if you type in, if you have a list from marketing of the challenges, or I hate to use the word pain points, but the actual reasons why people are buying, go into Google, do that reason spacebar, reason spacebar forum, reason spacebar discussion, and start being a voyeur of the conversation that's going on with the people who are actually talking about this issue. Like for me personally, when I have a sales related issue, I actually go to Amazon and I look at the actual people who are doing reviews to see the why behind. Why did they buy this book why did they buy Predictable Revenue? There's 250 reviews out there. That's gold for me to understand in their language why they plunked down their $8 to buy that book. So just doing that type of research will start narrowing the focus for you. So you're armed pretty much with the conversation in the language of the buyer as to what you need to say on the phone.
So one of the other topics that we want to touch on before we conclude here is cold emails, cold calling. What's your opinion of this? Because there's a lot of differing opinions out there from people on whether people should be doing it, should not be doing it. Email is dead. Cold calling is dead. What say you, Marylou?
I say use the best tool for the job. So have the tools in my ex-husband is a skateboarder. Have the tools in your quiver, all the different tools that are available, and pick the one that's going to give you the most precision and do it that way. It also depends on the types of leads you're following up on. We just had a class this morning where there's probably 20 different types of leads. So you need to understand which ones are going to be focused on by you. If you can do that, if you have the luxury, you want to be in that quadrant of high profitability, high likelihood to close, high revenue potential. And that's going to require a different set of tools probably than someone coming in who filled out a form. So I would say nothing is dead. It's maybe changed a bit, but as long as we're still the same humans that we are, and we're pretty close to the same way we were way back when, just go with that and use the best tool for the trade.
It would seem like you would want to find the tool that gets a response for that ICP. Some people, let's say it's a C-suite executive, may not respond to the drop by, just randomly stopping by and asking for 5 minutes or 3 minutes. but they might respond to a phone call after 5:30 in the afternoon. So
Right.
do you see some trending there depending on who you're reaching out to?
It's definitely prospect persona based. And it's also the industry based. Like I talked to this morning a property manager, and he wanted to see my face when we were talking. It wasn't like we could do a regular phone call. He wanted to do a Skype call because he wanted to see my body language. So it really comes down to knowing who your people are, the people that you're meeting at the various points in the pipeline. That's another thing too. Positionally in the pipeline, you may be meeting different people. So you have to meet them not only where they're at in their head, but also where they're at relative to the position in the pipeline that you're at. And there are different tools you use depending on where you're at.
Let's introduce the in-person and face-to-face, because I don't want to just focus on maybe the inside sales rep, the BDR, but let's talk about the account executive who's out actually getting face-to-face with people. How can that fit into the strategy of making contact, be it networking events, conferences, places where your ICP is at? How can you also leverage that? Do you have any advice for sales reps who are out in the field?
Well, I have a lot of students, believe it or not, of people who are doing all roles. 48% of my I did a survey, so I know this, that they're actually doing all roles. They're closing as well as prospecting. So what they do is we warm up the chill as much as possible after we get that lead. And we try to use data personalization, because not all of those leads are going to be actually good clients for us. And then eventually what filters up to the top are those leads that quote unquote score higher, that are ready for conversation. And then we immediately move them into more of a nurture hyper personalization sequence that may include a face-to-face. That may be part of our rhythm, part of our cadence, part of the way we sell includes a face-to-face, or includes, like I did today, where I was Skyping with somebody. But that's going to be relative. It always comes down to the buyer. It always comes down to your prospect as to how they like to transact with you, how they like to be sold. And we need to really get more into that, because it's still one-on-one conversation. It's not you to the masses. That's marketing. You are one-to-one, person to person, belly to belly, as we used to say, because we actually used to go out and make calls. So yeah, it hasn't changed in that sense.
That's wonderful. Well, Marylou, we want to go ahead and wrap up. But before we do that, thank you so much for your time today. Clearly, you are a sales process expert, and you've done a good job at communicating that and putting it into a nice little book titled Predictable Prospecting. So where can people find you if they want to connect with you online, as well as where can they go buy the book if they like what they're hearing?
Okay, well, Predictable Prospecting itself is published by McGraw-Hill, so it's available in all the distribution outlets, bookstores. I saw it at the airport. So you can get it there, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. As far as me, I'm at maryloutyler.com. If you do buy the book, there's a page called Swag, SWAG. So it's maryloutyler.com/swag, where I've put a lot of information. That 7 habits that we just talked about before is out there. The prospect personas, they're all out there. So you can go there and get all the information. I'm also on LinkedIn. And for those of you who are brave, yes, my office number is on there. I always return phone calls for people who reach out, because I love it when people are actually reaching out to me in a cold way. It's great.
You've also got a podcast where you're sharing some of these stories, right? So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that too, if they're looking for another wonderful podcast to subscribe to?
Sure. My podcast really focuses on bringing in colleagues who specialize in top of funnel. So they're going to, some people do what I do. Some people do the skills. Like I call myself the razor. They're the blades, because they make everything actually happen. My thing is just like the super highway, but we need intelligence to run down it. So I've invited colleagues like that help us, the psychology, like we talked about before, behavior. I had someone yesterday who talked about what to say in the first 5 seconds. We need to know that. That's important. So if you're looking to really up your game, in not only the process piece, but in the actual art, selling, and psychology. That's what I'm trying to focus on with my colleagues.
What do people need to search in iTunes or wherever to find that podcast?
Just Marylou Tyler, and Predictable Prospecting is the name of the podcast. So I think
Awesome.
there are 50 episodes out there now. It's exciting.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. I think.
Thank you.
Where are we at, Phill? We're coming up on 50 episodes.
You're getting close. So we're catching
Yeah.
you. You better get started and do more.
You're going to pass me. I did a blitz in August with the book release and had one every day. And then I'm like, okay, I'm done.
But that's the thing, is there is a lot of valuable content out there that people need to go consume. So I'm excited. Marylou, is awesome to have you on as a guest, and I'm definitely going to go back and listen to 50 episodes. I got some listening in the next 50 days.
All right, then. Thanks
Awesome.
again, guys.
Thanks so much again, Marylou. Really such a pleasure to get to see you face to face and chat with you and hear your story. And Real Sales Talk listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you love what you're hearing, write a review, and we'd love to hear what you'd like for us to talk about, or the guests that you'd like to have on the show. So feel free and hit us up on Twitter. You can use the hashtag Real Sales Talk, or you can hit up Sean M. Mitchell or Phill Keen, right? It's that Phill Keen? Cool. All right. That concludes this episode, and we'll see you all on the next one next week.